to the program today, Amlayo Olarinde, the former deputy president of the Nigerian Senate, Madu, has appeared before the Oxbridge Magistrate Court in the UK. Mr. Madu and his wife were arrested after the police were alerted to potential offences under modern slavery laws in the UK. Well, this is the second time he is appearing before the court. He is charged with arranging to bring a child to the UK for organ donation. The 60-year-old will remain in custody and is to appear at Westminster Magistrate Court on the 7th of July. No bail application has been made. Part of the alleged offence was committed abroad, and as a result, the consent of the Attorney General is required for the case to continue. In South Africa, after last year's chaotic attempt at electing new leaders, the Pan-African Parliament has concluded its elections successfully, supervised by the African Union Commission chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat. Former vice president of the body, Chief Fortune Charumbira, was declared the new president. He was eventually the only candidate running for that office after the issue of rotational leadership was adopted. He will be assisted by 4 vice presidents from Mauritania, Ethiopia, Cape Verde and Gabon during their 3-year term in office. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, reports.
The parliamentarians put most of the tension from last year behind, and negotiations paved the way for a much smoother session this time.
The regions that we do is north and south, and this time around we fielded our candidate as we did last year, Honorable Charambira, to represent the north, the south. Then the north has not fielded any candidate because we've been negotiating with the north to say after 3 years you are going to take it from us. What we are committed to do is to vote north as the first vice president to show our commitment.
The Southern African Caucus had a dissenting voice in Malawi's Jeremiah Chihana.
My candidates will not divide it. Rotation will change the principle of who should stand. So I'm the only candidate who will be available for under the principle of rotation, which we have been fighting for. So I am the candidate. I'm the sole candidate for Southern Africa.
Honorable Chihana didn't have backing, unfortunately, from his caucus. And voting for positions began late in the day, with the AU Commission Chairman Musa Faki Mahamat closely watching. It was a one-horse race, but not everyone supported the candidate. 161 members voted in favor. There were 31 abstentions and 11 spoiled ballots. Eventually, 60-year-old former vice president and traditional leader from Zimbabwe, Chief Fortune Charumbira, was declared the new president. Chief Charumbira says his priorities are to unify the African diaspora, fighting corruption, and restoring confidence in the Pan-African Parliament, which is expected to be a functioning legislative arm of the African Union.
This is now the critical moment for us to take Africa forward.
Thanks to the supervision of the African Union Commission, the Pan-African Parliament now has new leadership. And while the parliamentarians celebrate this new leadership, the huge task of clearing the webs of allegations of corruption, mismanagement, nepotism, which have dogged the Bureau, stare them in the face. And these are just some of the problems that this institution faces in its push for relevance on the continent. From the Pan-African Parliament, Midrand, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Now to the looming food crisis situation. Global Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba says his country is willing to unconditionally resume grain exports to Africa and other parts of the world if Russia ends the naval blockade in the Black Sea. In an interview, he said despite many African countries maintaining a neutral position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, his country would make sure it kept its part of the bargain. He's also urging the world and all African states to work together to pressure Russia to allow a safe sea route for the food exports. Fuel and food prices in Africa have skyrocketed since the 24th of February, when the Russia-Ukraine war started. And attempts by some leaders to ease the burden caused by the conflict have been unsuccessful. Over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC says the ongoing M23 and armed group activities has threatened to reverse the hard-won progress in security and stability in the country and its region. Briefing the Security Council, Bintou Keita, the special representative of the Secretary General for the DRC and head of MONUSCO, said that the security situation in the eastern region of the country has worsened progressively.
Should the M23 continue its well-coordinated attacks against FRDC and MONUSCO with increasing conventional capabilities, the mission may find itself confronted by a threat that goes beyond its current capabilities. Ongoing M23 and armed group activities in eastern DRC threaten to reverse hard-won progress in security and stability in Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region.
Staying with the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country has buried the gold-crowned tooth of independence hero Patrice Lumumba more than 60 years after he was assassinated. Well, it is the only part of his body that exists after his remains were dissolved in acid. The Belgian policeman who oversaw the disposal took the tooth as a trophy home. It was returned to the family last week and has toured several parts of DR Congo in a coffin. People have been able to pay their respects at the funeral that is taking place in the capital, Kinshasa. President Felix Tshisekedi, Lumumba's family and other dignitaries were at the service, which is taking place before the coffin is transferred to a specially built mausoleum. With the increasing risk of famine in the Horn of Africa due to severe and prolonged drought conditions, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is calling for an urgent life-saving and livelihood assistance in order to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. Well, as the crisis intensifies, FAO launched a revised rapid response and mitigation plan, which exclusively focuses on 4 drought epicenters across the region. That's Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia.
We are facing a catastrophic situation in the Horn of Africa. There are more than 18 million people who are acutely food insecure as a result of the drought. Just to be clear, this is a situation we have not seen in the last 40 years. 4 failed rains, a 5th failed rain that's upcoming. This really is catastrophic situations. We have large populations on the verge of famine facing starvation. There are millions of heads of cattle, livestock that have died in the Horn. The latest estimate is more than 7 million livestock in the Horn of Africa. About 1/3 of the livestock, this means, that vulnerable families rely on have died. What does that mean in practical terms? Poor, marginalized farming families no longer have access to milk for their children, for example. This is the type of catastrophic situation we're facing. FAO is responding in Somalia, in Djibouti, in Kenya, in Ethiopia to the drought. We've been there before the drought started. We implemented anticipatory actions, but we urgently need more funding. This is about giving cash to vulnerable farming households so that they can buy key supplies during this lean season. This is about keeping their animals alive so they're not forced to migrate. This is about anticipating a little bit the chance that they will have to plant in the future.
Well, let's get an update on our leading story for today. That's the former Nigerian Deputy President of the Senate, Madu, who has appeared before the Oxbridge Magistrate Court in the UK. Our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, brings us this update.
This case involving the former Deputy Senate President Madu is incredibly fast-moving and complex in its nature. Now, just about 24 hours ago, we were under the assumption that he wasn't to appear in front of Uxbridge Magistrates Court until next week, Thursday, the 7th of July, but appears as if some diplomatic pressure may have been added to the British courts. And then I received a tip-off very late last night that he would indeed be appearing hearing this morning. I was at court when the senator did appear in the dock, and he appeared incredibly well given the circumstances. There was a large delegation from the Nigeria High Commission in attendance, as well as what I believe were his two adult sons. His wife Patrice did not appear alongside him, and even though her defence asked for the court to allow her to attend, they did say that the matter would proceed without her. What the prosecution outlined is that a 15-year-old boy a couple of months ago was picked up from the streets in Lagos for the purpose of organ harvesting. An official document was put into the British High Commission in Nigeria, and a visa was granted. Now, suspicions were raised when this alleged child was consulting with doctors at the Royal Free Hospital. They weren't certain that he was telling the truth about his age and whether or not he consented to this organ donation. He then fled the Madu residence, and after 3 days of sleeping on the streets of London, he handed himself into the Metropolitan Police. And it was from that discussion with the police that a warrant was put out for an arrest for the senator and his wife. He was then arrested at Heathrow Airport on the way back from Nigeria. I believe at the time he was travelling to Turkey, and now he is facing very serious charges under Britain's Modern Slavery Act. Many of the details I can't go into now, but I will be updating you as this trial does continue. I believe one of the sticking issues now is jurisdiction. Is this trial going to take place in Nigeria, where many of the offences occurred, or is it going to be taking place in London? And now the magistrate did rule that the Attorney General must make a decision on this matter, which is why the case has been adjourned until Thursday, the 7th of July at Westminster Magistrates Court. Now, I do believe the senator will be sitting in front of a magistrate. However, it is very likely, because of the size of Westminster Court, that he could actually be sitting in front of a judge, and he is facing a lengthy prison sentence if indeed the Attorney General does rule that the case can be tried in London. There are some people that would ask whether or not this case has now been escalated into a diplomatic row, considering that Akwa Madu and his wife do have a residence here. Is it not possible for him to be under some sort of house arrest? Is it possible that the senator will be given some sort of diplomatic immunity? Those are really important questions, and I believe they could be answered as soon as next week, Thursday, when it will be decided if the senator is remanded into custody yet again, or he returns to Nigeria to face the courts there. Juliana Olayinka, reporting from Channels TV News in London.
We continue in Ghana, where hundreds of the citizens have staged a 2-day protest in the capital city of Akwa over the rising cost of living in the country. On the first day of demonstrations, at least 29 people were arrested after a largely peaceful protest descended into chaos when police and protesters clashed. The second day, on Wednesday, was largely peaceful, even as the government is trying to reassure the citizens that they're taking measures to mitigate the situation in the country. Maxwell Agbagba is Joy News TV correspondent. He was on ground the 2 days of the protest, and he gives us an update now on the situation.
Prior to the protest, there was a back and forth between organizers and the Ghana Police Service. The disagreement was mainly about the route for the protest and the time. The Ghana Police Service had argued that with the threat of terrorism on West African coastal states, it wasn't proper for the protest to go deep into the night. The protesters and the organizers of the demonstration disagreed. The matter ended up in court, with the court ruling that the protest should take place from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It also set a defined route for the protest. On the day of the protest, there were disagreements. Organizers of the protest had argued they had filed a stay of execution on that particular ruling by the court, and that puts that ruling by the court in abeyance. Police also disagreed and said it was implementing the order that it got from the court on the defined routes that should be used. The situation degenerated and turned chaotic when some of the protesters started pelting police with stones. Police fired tear gas to disperse the riotous crowd. Ghana Police Service said it was also compelled to use water cannons to disperse the crowd. 12 police officers were injured. Some protesters were also injured in the process. The second day of the protest was very peaceful. A litany of issues triggered the protest. Key amongst them was the electronic transactions levy, which came into effect some weeks ago, despite opposition from many people that it would bring untold hardship on them. Currently, there are about 12 taxes and levies on the price of fuel, which contributes to the price build-up and how much people pay at the pumps to get fuel. The organizers say that the cost of fuel is too much, and they are calling on governments to eliminate some of the taxes and levies imposed on fuel, which is contributing to what they describe as the astronomical price build-up.
Authorities in Chad have said more than $20 million was allegedly embezzled from a state-owned hydrocarbon company. Information Minister Abdurrahman Koulamala made the accusation on national television. The minister, who is also the government spokesperson, said there was an investigation which led to the revelation of the embezzlement. But a bank named in the alleged scandal has threatened to sue for defamation and has strongly denied any involvement in the transactions in question. However, the government has appointed a new head and deputy 2 days before this announcement. The Sudanese Doctors Union say a protester was killed during anti-military demonstrations on Wednesday in Khartoum after security forces used excessive force against protesters. The doctors say that the security forces used excessive force thinking they could silence the growing revolution, or the death toll has climbed to 103 as a result of the crackdown against the pro-democracy demonstrations prompted by last October's military coup in Sudan. Activists have planned another nationwide protest for Thursday to press for civilian rule. Reports say the authorities have already taken a number of measures ahead of the protest, including the deployment of security forces, closure of bridges, and a possible disconnection of the internet. The UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, in partnership with the Joint Verification and Monitoring Mechanism, has held a day-long workshop in Juba with all stakeholders to assess the progress made in protecting civilians in the country and ensuring that humanitarian aid is received by the most vulnerable.
As part of its mandate, UNMISS regularly deploys force protection teams to conflict hotspots and accompany humanitarian convoys and insecure routes in support of the delivery of humanitarian assistance. The UN peacekeeping mission agreed on a new way forward to prevent government authorities to ensure unfettered access to communities in need.
It gives us an opportunity to develop our communication between each other, to look at our coordination. To a large degree, we have shared objectives, and so we have an obligation to help each other maximize the impact that we have in achieving our respective mandates.
Consistent engagement between UNMISS and the South Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has boosted the mission's efforts to help prevent conflict and build a lasting peace in this young nation.
South Sudan, as a member of the United Nations, acknowledge the role of the UN peacekeepers to protect civilians, actively prevent conflict, reduce violence, strengthen security, and empower national authorities to assume all the mentioned responsibilities. It is in line with this principle that coordination between the leadership of the United Nations forces in South Sudan and South Sudan People Defense Forces and other organized forces to have this workshop in order to educate themselves on areas of coordination or other forms of sexual violence against.
The main aim of this joint venture is to ensure communities can look forward to a future of stability and prosperity.
One of the prerequisites for us to do our job effectively is that we should have freedom of movement. So where there has been what we call access denials, or denials of access by patrols from UNMISS, it frustrates our capacity to do our job properly.
The UNMISS acting force commander commended all stakeholders for signing this unique set of guidelines to uphold the mission's mandate of helping the government protect its people last year and lauded the dividends reaped since.
Few can be stated here that it is outstanding transparency, confidence building, increased freedom of movement, effectiveness in the executing mission mandate, and the list is not exhaustive.
Strengthening such partnerships are a necessary step forward in the relationship between UNMISS and the government of South Sudan to ensure the safety and security of all citizens and build a future free of conflict.
South Africa's small businesses that are still reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and squeezed by inflation at a 5-year peak are now taking further strain during the worst power cuts in over 2 years. Well, the struggling state electricity company Eskom implemented the stage 6 outages, meaning that at least 6 hours of power cuts a day for most South Africans. And this is for the first time since December 2019 and again on Wednesday, June 29. Business owners in Johannesburg's sprawling Soweto township say they are feeling the immediate impact of this.
We get a third of what we sell. If we sell 6,000, now we get 2,000. So this is, we get a third of what we sell a day with inflation.
To the migrants crisis in Africa, Libyan ambulance service has found the bodies of 20 migrants who got lost in the Libyan desert near Chad. The bodies were discovered by a truck driver traveling through the desert and were recovered on Tuesday, about 320 kilometers southwest of Kufra and 120 kilometers from the border with Chad. According to officials, the driver got lost and it's believed the group died in the desert about 14 days ago, since the last call on the mobile phone there was on June 13. 2 of the bodies were Libyans and the others were believed to be migrants from Chad crossing illegally into Libya. Well, still on illegal immigration, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Kenya to the United Nations, Michael Kiboino, says that what happened to the migrants trying to enter the Spanish enclave of Melilla is a blatant violation of a Human Rights Council resolution. Speaking to journalists in New York, he says that the migrants in Spain, rather than being protected, were assaulted.
What happened to the migrants trying to enter the Spanish enclave of Melilla is a blatant violation of this resolution. Rather than being protected, they were assaulted. Tragically, this was not an isolated incident. It is part of a worrying trend in recent years in which people of African descent traveling to Europe via the Mediterranean suffer extreme violations of their human rights. Thousands have died, thousands of others have been sold into slavery, and many more have been violently assaulted. We have witnessed what the international community is capable of when it is truly mobilized around a cause. We hope to see not just a condemnation of what happened in the Spanish enclave of Melilla, but more importantly, practical measures to ensure that such acts do not happen again anywhere.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.